Images of destruction on an apocalyptic scale. This was how Kobani in northern Syria looked in late January 2015, after months of bitter fighting, before the Kurds were able to celebrate victory over the self-styled Islamic State, thanks also to US airstrikes. But their war against IS would continue elsewhere for a further 4 long years, until March 2019, when they conquered the terror group's last bastion. The wounds will take a long time to heal, but the Kurds are already rebuilding their country. The various parties to the conflict in Syria all have their own plans for the post-war era. But what do the Kurds want, here in Rojava, as they call their territory in northern Syria? Our journey to Rojava begins on a ferry boat taking us across the river Tigris, subject of legend since ancient times, and which now follows the border between modern-day Iraq and Syria. Here, the river marks the eastern boundary of traditional Kurdish territory in northern Syria, which is divided into 3 major regions. Yazira in the east centers on the city of Kamishli, the Euphrates region on Kobani. In early 2018, Turkish forces attacked and occupied the western region of Afrin in what they referred to as an anti-terrorist operation. They also reinforced their border, as seen here in Kobani. Years previously, Ankara had already placed an embargo against Rojava, insisting its rulers were a wing of the banned Kurdish Workers' Party, the PKK. We'd been to Rojava on 2 previous occasions, in 2014 and 2015. When the Kurds were just beginning to build their own administration. For the next few years, the region was unsafe for journalists to travel to, until late summer 2018. So what had become of Rojava and the ambitious plans of the people we had met back then? Our journey continues to Kamishli, the biggest city in Rojava. The influx of refugees fleeing the war has seen the population of Rojava increase from 4 to an estimated 5 million. In addition to the Kurds, Rojava is also home to Assyrian Arameans, Arabs, and Turkmen. When the Syrian government withdrew from the northern region during the civil war in 2013, the groups took joint control of their territory. We first met Taha Khalil in Kamishli in 2014, when we accompanied him on his way home. He used to live in Switzerland. He now works as a presenter on the Ronahi TV station. Like all journalists there, he was armed, in case of Islamist attacks. A few months before we met Khalil, his daughter Halabia had been killed in one such attack. How does he see the situation today?
The threats have diminished, but so have the opportunities for work. What we want now is for other people to see and hear what we have managed to do here. 60 journalists were killed, for example, but I've rarely heard anyone talk about it. And journalists are still in danger. Except now, not just from IS, but also from Turks, and from the Syrian regime and its militias.
Looking back, how does he assess the establishment of self-government in Rojava, which was still in its infancy during our original visit?
The people in charge made a lot of mistakes initially. But over time, they've gathered experience and improved. The Turks are going crazy because they always thought that Rojava was laughable and would be gone again after a few months. But now they're noticing, as we are, that Rojava has continuously evolved. I hope that over time we'll be able to bring about real change here for Syria, not just for Rojava.
In 2016, representatives of the various ethnic groups announced the creation of the Democratic Federation of North Syria, known as Rojava. The autonomous government of the Yazira region meets here in Amuda, we asked officials about the objectives of their model for society.
The real war we found ourselves fighting was not with weapons, but changing relations between the genders. Over 5,000 years, the male-dominated mentality has become entrenched here. It's not easy to abolish. You might see women everywhere, but it's still often men who have the final say. It's illusory to believe that you can change that mentality in the space of just 20 years. Here in Rojava, we've had to rely more on our own resources than on outside help.
2017 saw the first elections in Rojava, which, we are told, were held on the basis of grassroots democratic principles.
Our first elections were at the smallest local level. Local administration forms the basis of society. We then held elections at the second level, for city and regional leadership. They were a bit difficult due to events in Afrin.
Since the Arabs here were liberated from IS control and became familiar with our model for society, they've now become increasingly receptive to the project. The liberated Arab towns now govern themselves. And it's precisely those Arab towns that are so important for our administration. One thing I would like to emphasize: due to Arab culture, women there had little influence in society. In our system of self-government, they now enjoy equal footing with men.
The foyer features a little tree bearing the photos and names of young fighters who fell in the battle for Rojava. It's one of the many places where people remember their martyrs, as they are seen here. The war has exacted a heavy toll on the younger generation, but that has not stopped people here in their determination to continue defending their country.
We're happy that we women are also able to take up arms. That used to be impossible. Now we too are defending our country and are available wherever we're needed.
IS are barbarians. They have nothing to do with Islam. In Islam, you do not cut off people's heads. That's what we're defending our children against, and why we are here.
The Turkish army's invasion of Afrin left Rojava overwhelmed by a wave of refugees. International aid was conspicuous by its absence, complains one of the representatives.
They always tell us that they can't do anything because the Syrian system doesn't let them. A lot of refugees are here without food, without medicine, without anything.
We set out to meet some of the refugees and arrive at a seemingly never-ending camp. The Turkish military offensive left an estimated 200,000 people displaced from Afrin. 2019 will see tens of thousands more arrive from areas liberated from IS. Some have found a temporary home in the abandoned village of Til Nesri near Til Temer. 70 families from Afrin now live here, with their stories related to civilian victims of the Turkish invasion.
We didn't want to leave our houses and property behind, but we had to, because of the bomber planes. Children like these here were simply killed. Their bodies were everywhere. Some had severed legs, others had no arms. People were desperate and didn't know what to do. We had to flee. The bombs fell and there were planes, and we had to leave our homeland.
We had land and a house. Our children went to school there. We were unable to take anything with us, just the clothes on our backs. We had to leave behind all our documents, our land and our money. Everything. All we could think about was saving ourselves and getting out of there. Didn't the world hear about the air raids? Were people blind and deaf? Nobody saw the planes above us? There was no respite. They bombarded us for 55 days.
We all fled while the planes bombed us. It wasn't possible to leave by car, and we had to escape via the mountains. Our sole priority was getting to safety. For 2 whole days, I couldn't give my child any milk. I grabbed her like this every time it got loud. She was scared and cried.
The village used to be home to Christian Assyrians before it was destroyed by IS. Like thousands of others from Afrin, its new residents first found refuge in the overcrowded camp in Sheba.
There weren't even any tents there when we arrived. We spent the first 20 days living and sleeping on the streets. Sometimes it was cold and rained, which cost the lives of a lot of small children. There were no doctors, there was no water, practically nothing to eat. There were too many people. We had to get out of there.
The Kurds were abandoned by the international community and left to their own fate following the Turkish invasion, says TV presenter Taha Khalil. He witnessed events in Afrin firsthand.
The Kurds always had huge hopes in Europe, especially Germany. But what we saw in reality was very saddening. We couldn't believe what we saw in Afrin, for example, when the first tanks arrived with the Turkish invasion. German-made tanks. Nobody challenged that. And that's why I've lost a lot of hope I had in Europe. We defended ourselves against the terrorists, against IS. Then the Americans arrived. So I said, first, we have to do something. And if we do something good, then I think other people will follow. And again, not because of us, but because of their own interests. We have a lot of water here in Rojava, and oil, gold, and phosphates.
Our next stop is the Tishrin Dam on the river Euphrates. The region borders territory occupied by Turkey and is home to one of the biggest reservoirs of water in Rojava. The dam was the scene of fierce fighting during the Civil War. Whoever controlled the dam also controlled electricity production for Raqqa and Aleppo. In December 2015, it was captured by Kurdish-led forces. It initially had been taken by the Free Syrian Army in 2012, before being conquered by IS in 2014. Tishrin Dam has 6 turbines. Even now, it still has to be protected from potential attacks. But currently, the engineers have problems of a completely different nature to focus on. Mahmoud Abdi is the head of the Regional Self-Government's Energy Commission. An old contract, he explains, requires Turkey to supply a guaranteed amount of water from the river Euphrates.
Between 2003 and 2011, when the Syrian government was in control here, the amount of water was over 500 cubic meters per second, more than required by contract. In the years 2015 and 2016, when IS were here, it was 643 cubic meters. Then, after the dam was liberated from IS, it was just 394 cubic meters. And in 2018, the level dropped to 235 cubic meters. So, after the Islamists had been driven out, Turkey used the water supply as a weapon against us and has been causing huge problems for people in the region.
The water in the dam has fallen dramatically. Mahmoud Abdi details the disastrous consequences. Hospitals, bakeries, and farms suffer from frequent power shortages. With only 2 turbines running, he explains, it's extremely difficult to maintain even a rudimentary supply of electricity. At the same time, he and his team have to deal with the damage wrought by the Free Syrian Army and the Islamic State.
With the limited means available to us, we managed to restore the dam to a relatively good condition. But we urgently need spare parts. We've already fitted the parts we have.
The ability of the Tishrin Dam to guarantee Royaba's electricity supply in the future depends on Turkey, he says. The fear at the headquarters of the Syrian Democratic Forces in Ain Issa is that Ankara will continue to use every means at its disposal to prevent an autonomous Kurdish region in its backyard. The SDF are an alliance of militia groups in which the Kurds constitute the main fighting force. They were also supported by 2,000 American troops. In early 2019, news of their possible withdrawal caused an outcry.
What is important now is not only the Turkish occupation of Afrin, but currently the attempts to change, I think, the demographical situation inside Afrin by bringing people from different areas, from different ethnic components or religious components from different places, whether it is from Damascus, from Homs, from Hama, from Idlib, and make them stay in Afrin and not allowing the original people of Afrin to come back to their homes.
Following the events in Afrin, say the SDF, there was an increase in skirmishes with the Turkish army.
They are starting small attacks against our forces, so when we respond in defense of ourselves, they are accusing us of attacking them, they are accusing us of being a threat to their security, and that is how they want to get also to legitimize their attacks or the interventions against the borders of Syria.
The spokesman is eager to point out the importance of close cooperation with the civilian representatives of the autonomous government in Rojava.
Every time that, as a military force, that we liberated any area or any part of the region that we are in now, we directly formed and supported the civilian councils and administrations for this area.
We continue our journey to visit a base held by a unit of the all-women YPJ Brigade. The young women of Rojava have developed a fundamentally new concept of their role in local society, and also as regards the military. For years, women fought alongside men in the battle against the terrorist militias of IS. Among Kurdish combat units, they are claimed to make up almost 1/4 of troop numbers. These two commanders have seen frontline action at a variety of theaters in the war. In civilian life, Seima Bahar was a stage actress.
Once the war is over, I'd like to see a change in people's attitudes and for us to continue developing our project for society.
A lot of young women are keen to sign up and fight at an early age. They have to be 18, however, before they can be accepted for combat duty.
When we began our revolution in Rojava, it was also a revolution for women. Nobody ever imagined it would be possible for men and women to fight shoulder to shoulder as comrades, working together for days at a time. Nobody could have hoped for that, but now we've done it. Men and women have equal rights here. They always make decisions jointly in our mixed structures of self-government.
Women have been the initiators of many ideas that would previously have been unthinkable. The banner at the entrance to this women's cooperative in Amuda proclaims the beauty of women. The group of 10 women joined forces in order to become more independent, overcoming initial opposition from their husbands.
Here in the Middle East, women do not have equal rights. They're meant to remain invisible and uneducated. But we made a break with that mentality. This is a unique project here in Amuda. Women now have a public presence and are running a shop where we buy and sell everything ourselves. And women are also our customers here. The only thing men are allowed to do here is shop. When men used to count money, they would often say to each other, "Let me do it, you count like a woman." But that's over now.
The shop sells both clothes the women have made themselves and additional stocks they have to buy from elsewhere.
This is our revolution. We have our women fighting at the front, but the work we do is just as important. You could see it as an interior front.
There are also plans for another women's project in Amuda, an entire shopping street run exclusively by women. The healthcare system is still under construction, but otherwise the women's village of Jinwar outside Dirbosiye has already been completed. Women are determined to be in charge of their own lives here. Nujin Deria from Germany has been assisting their efforts.
The women moving in here are widows who have lost their husbands or members of their family in the war. Some of the women have had trouble at home, such as domestic violence. They want to free themselves from challenging situations and find a new home here. And of course, there are women who just want to live together here.
The 30 houses were built with clay bricks in accordance with ecological and traditional construction methods, ensuring they're cool in the summer and warm in the winter.
It's so impressive. You notice how a lot of men who come here are initially skeptical and have difficulty imagining what this is supposed to be. Plus, it's a completely different working atmosphere here, which gives the men who work here food for thought. I've been learning a huge amount here. It's amazing to see the village growing and to see the links growing deeper day by day, both between the women in the local committee and with surrounding villages. All the new developments make me want to stay here longer.
Our journey continues to Kobani, on the border to Turkey, a city the world looked on with bated breath in late 2014 and early 2015. It was in Kobani that not just the fate of Rojava, but also the course of the civil war in Syria would be decided. We managed to reach Kobani right after its liberation, and we still remember the images of a destroyed city, in large parts razed to the ground. Now we experience a different Kobani. At first glance, it looks just like any other city in the region. When we were here in early 2015, most of the people we met were Kurdish fighters. Most of the inhabitants had fled. But soon after the liberation, the population returned and made Kobani a city buzzing with life again. We're surprised to see how little of the destruction is still visible and decide to take a closer look. By the turn of 2015, Kobani had been reduced to ruins, with 80% of the city destroyed. How could the city be resurrected? How would people ever be able to live here again? The battle for Kobani lasted 134 days. IS deployed 50 tanks and 7,000 troops in its assault on a city of over 100,000 people. The Kurds defended their city in house-to-house fighting, initially outnumbered and outgunned with their 5,000 fighters, and weapons that were either outdated or self-built. Thanks to US airstrikes, the tide continued to turn in their favor. By the end of January 2015, the city was under Kurdish control, but fighting continued in the surrounding region. IS had overrun some 365 villages, but now the Kurds were recapturing them, in the process puncturing IS's aura of invincibility. Kobani was now the turning point in the war against IS and the beginning of the end of its self-proclaimed caliphate. And for the Kurds, a beacon of their resistance. This is what's left of a school that, like so many others, was destroyed by ground battles and airstrikes. It's where Perver used to be a teacher. This is where we first met him, before he worked for us as an interpreter. Perver had shown us around a destroyed industrial area together with a group of Kurdish journalists, an area that had seen particularly fierce fighting. These workshops were used by mechanics serving Islamic State to repair vehicles and build car bombs. The walls are covered in graffiti glorifying IS. Perver had shown us a tunnel where he and other locals sought shelter during air raids. Today, Perver works as a journalist. We accompanied him as he returned to the neighborhood where IS had its deadly workshops. But here, too, there are relatively few physical scars from the war between IS and the Kurdish YPG forces.
In 2015, you could barely walk in this area because of the destruction and rubble. In this spot that I'm standing, there was a hole. ISIS at that time was using this hole to shoot at YPG fighters. Those people who came back during the war will not recognize these areas again because now it's clean. The hole was paved in this area and the life is normal. People start to work this area. You can see the shops everywhere.
Freedom Square had practically been reduced to 2 dimensions back then. This is where we arranged an interview with Enver Muslim, then co-president of the Kobani Canton. Now he's a member of the autonomous government's executive council. Practically the only physical reminders of the conflict are the countless bullet holes in the facade of the administrative building.
We have a lot of social projects of our own, but we don't want a divided Syria. We want a united country with a democratic basis, where all social groups are able to live on an equal footing and according to their culture. We believe that social problems cannot be solved militarily, only by peaceful and equal coexistence between the ethnic groups. This could become an example for the entire Middle East. We've supported this in Afrin and are doing it here in Kobani.
There were a number of promises from abroad to help reconstruction, he reports, but none were kept.
So we didn't wait for outside help. We still have a lot of work to do. We have destroyed houses and people living in hardship. We want to help them.
Over 50% of Kobani has been rebuilt, says Enver Muslim. We go to visit one of the new residential districts.
After the war, people start to renovate, to rebuild their houses. This small part were rebuilt due to the helps which came to Kobani people, but remorsefully, it's only these buildings were because of help or Kobani reconstruction. The other areas were rebuilt by Kobanian people by their own. But anyway, it's good that now we see Kobani rebuilt after this mass destruction.
The war devastated Kobani's infrastructure. When we were here in 2015, the city had no drinking water or electricity. This was what was left of one of the main shopping streets. Many of those returning had to live in emergency shelters.
In this street, there was heavy clashes, and in every street there were a curtain because ISIS snipers were using curtains to shoot the YPG fighters at that time. Now you can see the life is normalized and it's very crowded. People are shopping here. The shops are normal like before.
Today, the shops appear well stocked, and shoppers in Rojava can buy practically everything again, unlike in 2014, when supplies were disrupted. Turkey's embargo on the region had a severe impact on the people's daily life. Many items had to be smuggled into the country at great expense. In the meantime, supply routes are now up and working via Syria and Iraq. Many people in Afrin fled to Kobani following the Turkish invasion. Such as this family, who have since found a place to stay with relatives. They make regular calls home, in which they hear about constant harassment from the new rulers in Afrin.
Some of our relatives who stayed behind were put under pressure to leave. But if you leave, they put people from Ghouta in your house. They steal your gold. And if they want to arrest you, they just do it. Everyone is under constant surveillance. And they make arbitrary arrests. They force people to go to the mosque. Women have to wear a long black dress. These are their new laws for everyone, whether you're Kurdish or from Aleppo.
And did the Kurds put up any resistance?
The Kurdish militias fought back. But how can you fight off a member of NATO for 60 days with all their weaponry? It's impossible. The Kurds tried everything they could to stop them, but they failed.
This pharmacy in the center of Kobani belongs to Menaf Kitkani, who was also among the people we met in 2015. Back then, medication was in desperately short supply, but not today.
The situation has improved a lot, by maybe 70%. We hope things will continue to improve and that the roads will reopen. That will make it easier to get medication for local people.
In 2015, we filmed Menaf Kitkani collecting urgently needed medicines from the city's bombed-out pharmacies. He also looked after people who had stayed in Kobani despite the fighting. 1,000 refugees from the area surrounding Kobani had found refuge in the border zone between Syria and Turkey, stranded without outside help. The Turks refused to let them across the border. The pharmacist helped to provide them with what they needed as best as he could. But all too often, he ran out of medication.
It was really tough. We had to wait ages for medication to arrive, if it did at all. We had no choice but to use medication past its expiry date. Fortunately, almost all the road links are now open again. We hope that the prices will now fall as well.
In 2015, Menaf Kitkani took us to see the local hospital, which lay in ruins after being blown up by IS. It had been equipped with modern facilities, thanks also to international aid from the likes of Frankfurt-based Medico International, which donated medication, a blood bank, and ambulances. Following the destruction of the hospital, doctors had set up a makeshift clinic in a basement. They treated both injured soldiers and civilians, emergency medical care with a war raging above ground, and with the doctors on duty around the clock. Hikmet Ahmed was among those who continued to work here even during the fiercest fighting seen in Kobani. When we shot this footage, 5 badly injured fighters from the front were brought in next door. 2 of them died that same night. This is one of the 2 new hospitals the Kurds were since able to build in Kobani. We managed to track down Hikmet Ahmed. He was on his day off, which is why we met him at home with his family.
The war is still not over. It's left its marks everywhere. The people are not on a sound psychological constitution. They're extremely anxious. Neither we nor our children will ever be able to forget all of this. There's still the smell of gunpowder in the air, and the souls of the fallen who used to live among us. Their souls are still there. Despite all that's happened, we would be glad to see things stay this way and carry on. We've made a lot of progress in the last few years, whether in government or elsewhere. There's been a change for the positive, despite all our shortcomings. But the international community only talks about murdered children and human rights violations in Ghouta. Aren't Afrin's children human beings?
What will be the long-term impact of this dreadfully long war on people in Rojava?
When the American soldiers came home from Vietnam, they needed psychological care for many years. We have thousands of wounded people here. Hundreds died in our arms because we didn't have the medical means to save them. People are plagued by the uncertainty. What about the Americans? What will happen if they stay or leave?
And those years have also taken their toll on him, says Dr. Ahmed as he shows us a photo.
Guess when this was taken? It's not even 8 years old, and this is me today. But you'd think it was 20 or 30 years ago.
Outside the hospital, we meet Khalil again. Kani, as he's commonly known, was already past middle age back then. But he too took up arms to join the fight against IS. He saw action on a number of fronts, including Kobani, until its definitive liberation. It was there that we first met the man who would become our escort when entering neighborhoods that had been laid waste. Going in alone would have been taking a deadly risk. We arrived shortly after the fighting had ended, the streets strewn with dead jihadists. And hidden mines, such as this one. Images that would haunt us for some time. Kani is accompanying us to a hill on the outskirts of Kobani, to the place where we first met.
I hope that Kobani becomes an example for the whole world. So many of our friends have shed their blood for this earth, and they continue to do so. Kobani should be a symbol. We want people from everywhere to be able to live together here peacefully. War always means destruction. Unfortunately, the great powers always act according to their own interests. They take their proxy wars to our cities, to Kobani and other places. We are against war. I am a soldier, but I am against war. We were forced to take up arms for our peace and security. We have no love of bloodshed and war, but unfortunately, we had no choice. A lot of my comrades fell in the battle for Kobani. Today, only 3 of them are still alive. I think everyone else was killed. We were 174 fighters, and now just 3 are alive.
The Kurds paid a high price for the liberation of Rojava. More than 21,000 injured and over 11,000 killed. In many places they are remembered. The region is dotted with memorials to them. The autonomous government has given local women the use of a large building. In Kobani too, women have organized a range of projects, including the Women's Refuge. As such, it is an educational institution. But staff also mediate when problems arise with marriages, families, and local neighborhood issues.
We are working against domestic violence and against polygamy. We also want to ensure that our sons and daughters have equal claims to inheritances. They ought to be shared equally between them, instead of the sons getting preferential treatment. We also want to ensure that marriages involving young people under the age of 18 are forbidden. But we don't want to do this by force. We want to bring about change over time through education.
Whether young or old, despite the danger posed by IS, women here are determined to defend their projects at all costs. The building, located on a thoroughfare in Kobani, is still under construction. A temporary school was housed here in 2015, immediately after the end of the fighting. Children coming voluntarily to the basement rooms was a symbol of hope at the time. But it was hugely challenging for the pupils. There were precious few books, pens, or pencils, and often the heater had no oil. Now, the proper owners of the buildings live here again.
We had to flee back then and lost everything. We didn't lock the doors when we left. I thought, if someone wants to break in, there's no point in them damaging the door as well. It's difficult for us. Food is expensive, and I don't have a job.
Unemployment is a major problem in Rojava, which officially named itself the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria following the liberation of other areas from IS in 2018. But despite the manifold problems, people here are inventive, says Shiro. They've learned to live with hardship and make the most of their opportunities. He himself has installed an espresso machine in the back of his van, offering the best cappuccino anywhere in the area. He boasts a range of coffee products and has drummed up a loyal clientele in next to no time. His business is booming. Not far away is another street, left as it was in 2015. Locals are planning to set up a museum here to preserve the memory of the war. IS launched several attempts to break through here to Turkey in order to control the border crossing. For the children, the area has become a playground. Having lived through the war, they're now growing up in today's Rojava, where we witnessed many new developments on our return. And many of the images we'll remember speak volumes. We were deeply impressed by how much the Kurds have already managed to achieve despite the endless difficulties. They are determined to expand on their model for Rojava. Our journey ends where it began, by the river Tigris. Goods are still being moved across via precarious-looking pontoon bridges, and the number of trucks is increasing again, a symbol of optimism for Rojava, say the Kurds. Despite all the challenges facing them, and despite the Turkish embargo, they now have re-established trading links with the outside world.